The free agency negotiating period starts today. I wouldn't call it a frenzy here in Jacksonville. I'll tell you all about that and more here on Locked On Jaguars.
You are Locked On Jaguars, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, I am Tony Wiggins, the host of the Locked On Jaguars podcast. Welcome to another edition of Locked On Jaguars, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast, where it's your team every day, and we thank you for making us your first listen. I want to also invite you to our YouTube page at Locked On Jaguars because it's free, and you get to see the video version of the show, and the audio version of the show is, of course, wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you tap in every single day. Well, today is the day for free agents, and usually it's a time for a lot of excitement here in Jacksonville. But since the Jaguars have sort of turned a little bit of a corner, guess what that means? That means today is probably not as exciting as it normally would be because the Jags are probably not going to be. In fact, we don't expect them to be, according to Trent Baalke, as well as to our own intuitions. We don't think that they're going to be extremely active in free agency. That's because they've hit on some of their own draft picks. They are more into development and retention now than they have been in the past. And also, quite frankly, they could try to make it work and do whatever they could with freeing up some salary cap space within their own team. But they've sort of committed themselves to a bunch of players already at these critical positions. So that matters too. And we'll, of course, touch on and go over that. I call it bargain hunting, if you will. So they'll be doing a little bit of shopping, of course. They're going to touch up their team and supplement the draft picks with free agents. It might not be until the second wave of free agency, which happens after the draft, where you'll find a lot of veterans. However, there are some things that are super, super attractive about Jacksonville, and I'll tell you what those things are here today on Locked On Jaguars. I'm also going to go through a couple of players, and I'm promise you, it ain't like you're going to do cartwheels and backflips and all that because you're going to be so excited. We're in a different phase right now of team building when it comes to Jacksonville, but I'll go through a couple of players, and these players are not it's not what I've heard. It's not inside information. It is my gut feeling based on what the leadership has said in the past, some of the things that they've talked about, the obvious holes at positions that I think they need to possibly upgrade, as well as just my feeling and my gut feeling of the type of player. So when you see these individual guys that I'm going to mention, it does not mean that I have any information that the Jaguars are actually targeting those people. I want to be very, very clear about that. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that these are the types that they'll go for based on what they like with traits. I'll even bring up a situation where they might need to go outside of the box with that. But it's also about what they'll conceivably not be able to afford, because the salary cap isn't real. You can afford whatever you want to afford, but where they're going in terms of the internal budget that they have seemed to put on themselves based on the things that they have spoken about and the commitments they've made to other players already. So we know that they need some help on the offensive line, especially if Jawan Taylor is not retained. And right now, I'm going to be honest with you, it doesn't look like he's going to come back here because somebody's going to offer him a boatload of money. I got a feeling that Chicago Bears will be first to offer Jawan Taylor a boatload of money. You can get confused by some of these lists because even the list that I looked at from a very, very reputable place has some of these guys ranked way, way low. Like, for instance, I was just listening to the NFL Network and with Daniel Jeremiah on there, and of course, Scott Pioli, guys that have held offices and personnel around the league, and they were mentioning like Draymond Jones, right? So Draymond Jones is this sought after free agent. Well, the list I had Draymond Jones ranked number 62. the list you see and the things that you read are not necessarily true. And that's because while Draymond Jones might be number 62 to one group of people, I've heard that he is the second best young interior defensive lineman on the board. So when you factor in age, recent production, need, and a thinness at these spots, other players can actually step up and be actually ranked a little bit higher on these teams' boards. And teams ain't gonna tell you exactly what these boards. These are folks that don't have jobs within the organization, but they're using their experience as well as their collective thought process about this particular class. So I'll trust guys like Jeremiah and guys like Pioli before I trust writers. It doesn't mean that they're always right, because they're not, because if they were always right, they wouldn't be sitting on TV. They'd still be in somebody's office, right? The thing about them is, although with Jeremiah, I have to tell you this, I heard Jeremiah left on his own because he wanted to be closer and be home with his kids every day. So that being said, I will tell you this. There are going to be some surprises. And I always say people tell you how they feel about players when you see the contracts. When you see Chris Lindstrom re-signed this morning with the Falcons for 5 years, $105 million. Nobody was talking about that. But I guarantee you, if you go inside if you put a helmet on or whatever and go into a tank with nothing but scouts or in a huddle with a bunch of scouts, they love guys like that. And he was rated number 1 center by PFF. So there's some things that people inside of the industry know that we're going to find out once guys start re-signing. And then, of course, everybody on TV is going to become an expert and tell you how great the guy is. But some of these guys that are ranked, and I'm going to give them to you with the Jaguars, because that's where the Jaguars, in my opinion, are going to dwell. It's going to dwell. They're not going to be in the hunt for one of the top 50 free agents. I don't believe that's where they are. I'm just going by the feeling that you get from listening to Trent Baalke, the feeling that you get from listening to Doug Peterson, and it's just where they are. When you know their roster in and out, you know that they're not really in that place where they're just going to reach out and start going for it with some of these older guys. So buckle up. We'll go through all of that. I'm going to tell you the first person that I think the Jaguars should be interested in. I don't know if they will, but it's the type of guy that in my opinion, this team is going to be going after. So I'm going to explain all of that to you here today on Locked On Jaguars. We're going to go through a few names and explain exactly what we believe is going to happen. And I'll do it in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars. I have to let you know today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. You've heard me talk about this mobile game app, and if you've ever thought you'd make a good GM, you got to give this game a try. It's not as easy as you might think to create a dynasty and still maintain the type of financial balance that you're supposed to. So while we're sitting here saying what teams need to be doing today, you try to do it yourself on Ultimate Football GM, and you will see exactly how hard it is. It's way harder than being a couch GM. So you have to hire the right coaches and coordinators. You have to manage the finances, including negotiating player salaries and terms. Navigate your franchise through free agency, the draft, injuries, personnel, all of that stuff. All in a challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is completely free and playable offline. Play on the go as you want and when you want to. I actually played on the plane to DC and back, and then on a plane to Jamaica and back in airplane mode, and it was absolutely scintillating. Locked On Jaguars listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo Locked On in all caps in the game store. That's Locked On in all caps. So make sure you check it out today. Go download the game in the game store or go to ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. You can also start hanging out with me today here on Locked On Jaguars, especially if you are new. If you're new, if you spend 5 seconds here with me and listen to one thing I have to say, then you're not new anymore. You're a part of us. You're just as antique and as old as we are, but we're doing it together, right? We're sitting here chilling, talking about free agency in the first day of the tampering period. I don't call it the legal tampering period because tampering is illegal, right? Um, so it's the legal negotiating period, is what we'll call it. It's always weird to me that they say, okay, to avoid the appearance of cheating, we're going to make it legal for you guys to negotiate 2 days before free agency actually starts. But what's to stop people from taking 2 days before that day and doing some negotiating? Because from what I've heard, I've been reading stuff all weekend about stuff that could possibly happen. So the bottom line is, how could you stop people and how could you manage it? And look, I think what they need to just do is say, once the Super Bowl is over, a week later, y'all can start negotiating and talking to whoever you want to, but you can't sign until this day. And I think the league tries to regulate it a little bit. But if you have a 2-day period for what they call early tampering, what's to prevent a 2-day period of early tampering, and then 2 days before that? So I don't know where you draw the line. It's just that I know why, from a TV perspective and from a content perspective, it's good that the NFL does it this way, and I'm fine with it. The Jaguars, according to Trent Baalke, to do a little bit of a recap on what his words were, that they're past spending money big in free agency. And I want to sit there for a minute, because something that I hold near and dear to my heart, whether it's in the college football, in the transfer portal, or in free agency, there's nothing wrong with free agency, especially when you have been frugal enough to have enough money to go out and get players and create a situation where maybe someone can come and finish their career here in beautiful North Florida, because we know North Florida is absolutely gorgeous. The thing with me is if you draft and develop well, because running a football team, we just talked about it with Ultimate Football GM, running a football team is more than just spending money on players and cherry picking players. It's about being able to build a team, right? So you want to build your team, and a part of that is drafting the right type of people, doing the right type of research and homework, and then developing those guys, whether it's not only through your training and having the best with the nutrition and the things in-house that makes a guy's career go better, but you develop a guy and you build it, and you figure out how this guy's going to work out. Now, sometimes it just doesn't work out, but sometimes it should just be an anomaly, not something that happens all the time. I don't like teams that are always in free agency signing everybody else's players, using everybody else's organization as a farm system when you failed to be able to have that exact same farm system for yourself. And for a long time, that's what the Jaguars did. Everybody around here knows that Dave Caldwell is a good friend of mine, but we discuss that. We talk about it. Sometimes you're dealing with things that are bigger than the fan would see, right? Sometimes there's a tug of war between the scouting department and some people in the organization and coaches, and there's no clear GM and there's no clear final decision maker. And so everybody is all over the place, just trying to do the best that they can with the rules that are set up. I think that's a bad way to do it. And I'm not saying that's how the Jaguars have done it, but it kind of feels like that's how they were doing it. The other part is being a destination place for free agents, where you don't have to go out and overpay and basically hold yourself out and beg somebody to come spend time with you, right? I think the Jaguars are beyond that. They're beyond that for two reasons. One, Doug Peterson. He's a Super Bowl winning coach that talks about credibility, but when you meet him, he commands respect. And I don't think he's going to get out here and twerk just for some free agent to come here and use Jacksonville for money and then just get what he wants and leaves. And Trent Baalke. Trent has basically said that, look, man, you don't build it through free agency, you build it through the draft. But it almost sounds like he was saying we did what we had to do in order to get some players here that could play. But the other main reason is Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence has transformed this franchise and turned it into what appears to be a winner. We don't think it's a one-year wonder, because we don't think he's a one-year wonder. So with the combination of Trevor and Doug Peterson, then the continuity of having most of your line come back, guys being more aware and understanding exactly what is expected out of them, you would expect the Jaguars to be at least as competitive, if not more, than they were last year. And I do too, especially when you look at the giant leap of where they came from the year before. So with that being said, it's a little bit different here. So when you can attract people, especially guys that may be not necessarily at the end of their career, but they're at a crossroads where they're sitting at the apex. Like if you're a 30-year-old lineman, you realize this is as good as you were ever going to get. And you've been starting this whole time. You know, you can go look in the mirror and understand, like, hey, I'm a pretty good player to be able to play in the league, but I ain't, breaking down the doors of Canton. I need to be in a good situation. And if that means being in a situation where I'm doing a little bit less for a little less, sometimes you just have to realize you're not the alpha or the Bravo, right? Sometimes you got to be the Charlie, the C+ guy. And that's what we're looking at today with the Jaguars. And we're thinking that they're going to have to tap into some of these guys that were just a part of a winning organization and want to still be a part of a winning organization, but don't have illusions of grandeur of getting super, super paid. So if you saw my thumbnail today, Isaac Seumalo is a guy that I am looking at saying that's the type of player that the Jaguars can go and get. Who is he? Well, he's picked in 2016 by guess who? The Philadelphia Eagles. He played for Doug Peterson when they won the Super Bowl. He's had a couple of injuries throughout his career. He's 29 years old. He has played both left and right guard, played right guard last year. When he came back from injury, they had Landon Dickerson at left guard. He played right guard. But prior to that, he was a really, really good left guard for the Eagles. Now, he's not huge. He's 303 pounds, but he's 6'4". I just think this is the type of dude that Doug knows exactly what he is, and there are no illusions of grandeur from Isaac as like somebody's going to pay him like he's the next John Hanna or Larry Allen, because he's not. But this is exactly the type of off-the-radar sort of signing you could get to go get a veteran that could shore up this line, that understands your workflow and understands how you're supposed to get it done. And he won't cost you the money that losing Jawan Taylor or keeping Jawan Taylor would have cost you. In fact, he's probably going to cost you about a third of that on the market, especially if you structure the deal. So if you're going to plug Walker Little in at right tackle and you're going to get Cam Robinson back from injury, guess what? Isaac Seumalo is a veteran. And understand something. Anything that I say about the offensive line, I have one objective, and that is to keep number 16 upright and make sure he feels protected. And there's no better place to do that in the middle of the line. So now you're talking about a guy who started for two teams that made the Super Bowl. One team won the Super Bowl. Philly won it in 2017, and then, of course, last year they fell short. But you're talking about a guy that played at an extremely high level for the Philadelphia Eagles, and Doug Peterson knows exactly who he is, and he won't cost you a lot. So there's your fifth starter right there if you decide to do that if you're Jacksonville. I'm going to talk about two more players that I believe that make a lot of sense for the Jaguars. And like I said, it's players like this, not necessarily these guys. Although that first one is pretty unique to the point where that kind of am what I am talking about. I'm talking about him specifically. But these are the type of things that the Jaguars are going to be up to over the next couple of weeks and even probably after the draft. But these are the type of signings that you want to see, guys who can play, but guys who won't cost as much and who the coaching staff is very, very familiar with. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about two more players, and we'll do it in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars. I have to let you know that today's sponsor also is FanDuel, and I am so happy that FanDuel and Locked On are locked in together. It's the midway point, or a little bit beyond the midway point of the NBA season, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. Man, I'm telling you, I've been finding some guys that have been putting up a bunch of numbers. Watch the numbers that Josh Hart has been putting up since he has been traded to the Knicks, and he's really, really helping them, although they had a hard time out west. But he has been a really, really good player. And FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go FanDuel.com/locked on. That's FanDuel.com/locked on to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. And I am TWIGG. Love to have you guys here with me and making us your first listen here on Locked On Jaguars as we get into the first wave of free agent negotiation. I'm watching a report. I'm giving you stuff as it hits. I just saw that running back Austin Eckler he's requesting permission to speak with other teams about a trade. What in the LA Chargers is going on that Austin Eckler wants to go and look around? That's very, very interesting. Not for us because we have Travis Etienne here in Jacksonville, so that does not matter. I told you I'd give you a couple of names, one that makes sense, one that doesn't. So let's just say the Jaguars, whether they sign someone like Isaac Seumalo or not, that if they move on if they're not able to get Juwan Taylor back, and they have their starters, you'd have Walker Little at right tackle, and you'd have Cam Robinson coming back off an injury at left tackle. You still need a swing. So do you want your swing tackle to be a draft pick? There's a very good possibility that they could draft someone in the first round at right tackle and just say, well, he's going to compete, but we think he can win the job. And then that still leaves Walker Little as your backup left tackle, or a guy competing with Cam Robinson for the left tackle position, or competing at right tackle. That's fine. Or you can sign a veteran. Remember, my goal is to keep Trevor Lawrence upright, period. That's the goal for me. So a 30-year-old guy who started a lot of games, who's played a lot, moved at left and right tackle, Cameron Fleming. He played last year with the Denver Broncos. Comes to mind. He's not a great player by any stretch of the imagination. Cameron Fleming's 30 years old, right? He started a lot of games. But Cameron Fleming is the exact type guy you need as a swing tackle. Remember, no losers of grandeur. You can pay him a pretty decent salary to be the guy that you hope never has to play. But just in case, you have an experienced player protecting your number one asset, which is Trevor Lawrence. So look for names like that and folks like that at this point. And he still fits the height length requirement that I'm putting on Trent Baalke as his traits. He's 6'6", 317 pounds. So the last guy I'm going to mention is not height and trait guy, but he is someone who had his best season of his 4-year career last year. He plays the edge position. Here's my problem with Ogbonnaya Okoronkwo, okay? He's at best 6'1.5", 6'2", 253 pounds. But to me, he is a pure situational edge rusher. He's depth at edge. The problem is he doesn't give you the traits and the length that Trent Baalke wants. But sometimes I think when a guy has enough demonstrated performance, you can get past that. And I have an example of Trent and Doug doing that. They did it with Darius Williams, the outside corner. They're probably hoping he can play nickel a little bit better. But Darius Williams is generously listed at 5'10". He's a small guy, right? He moves outside and he's better outside. The Jaguars still need a corner. I'm thinking that because they went for a guy like that who had enough demonstrated performance to say that his lack of stature outplayed the fact that he doesn't fit your traits. And they could do this with Ogbonnaya Okoronkwo. Why? Because you're not bringing Yannick Ngakoue back. I don't believe they're going to do that at this point, especially with how things were when he left. But I think a guy like Ngakoue still believes he's a starter in this league. He's since he's coming to the league, he's in the top 5 of sacks and forced turnovers at the quarterback position from the edge. So I think he believes he's still going to be a starter, even though he's not great against the run, but he can still rush the passer. Well, a guy like Ogbonnaya Okoronkwo, he can be what Arden Key was last year. Arden Key came off of his best season and had another good year. So now he's probably going to get priced out of the Jaguars market. Well, Ogbenaya had 5 sacks last year in his role with the Houston Texans, and he was a part of a rise. Prior to that, he wasn't a sack machine when he was with the Rams, but he's played now on. He's a guy who won a Super Bowl. So you got a guy who came from a winning organization who had his best season with a losing organization. He's probably where Key was a year earlier, even though Key came from San Francisco, but Key had losing seasons in Oakland. Therefore, I think it's a guy you can go out and get. You can go out and get a seasoned pass rusher. He's a professional. He's still young. He's 26 years old. You get him under contract for 2-3 years. I don't think it's a 1-year prove it deal. I think you can get him under contract for 2 years with the right amount of guaranteed money. And no illusion, he's the third pass rusher and he's a situational player, and he knows that. He knows it. I think Hassan Reddick is going to help a lot of players like this because he helped the Eagles get to the Super Bowl by having 17 sacks, and he's not traditional, right? The only difference with him is they play a 4-3 and he plays Sam linebacker, and he only comes down to rush on passing down. So there's a big difference because he can help you even when he's not doing that thing that you go out and sign him for. But those are the three guys. Isaac Seumalo for a reasonably nice deal to play left guard. Ogbenaya Okoronkwo, a long shot because he's only 6'1" and 253, and a swing tackle like Cameron Fleming to help you out. Now, the bulk of the work is going to be done in the draft. If you sign Seumalo, you're not drafting another guard, but you could still draft a right tackle and have that same situation that I described with Walker Little and Cam Robinson. With the edge, this doesn't prevent you from drafting an edge, but it gives you a short-fire, NFL-proven professional that can at least spell one of the guys that's in front of him, Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker, and can play alongside him when you move Josh or one of those guys inside on extreme passing situations. To have a guy like that before the draft gives you the flexibility to make sure you draft the best player available and not drafting somebody for need. Make sure you check us out here on the Locked On Jaguars podcast. And if you want to know more about the draft and more prospects, make sure you check out Locked On NFL Draft, man, because I'm telling you, it is the move. That is a great podcast. And you guys make sure you tap into that and check it out, because my man Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez provide in-depth coverage of the biggest NFL draft prospects, and they take deep dives into the sleepers, the hidden gems that can change your favorite NFL franchise. Find Locked On NFL Draft wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. All right, man, we thank you for joining us here, and join us again tomorrow where we'll discuss some moves that were made. If the Jaguars make any moves or make any negotiations, we'll make sure that we bring those to your attention and give you some more insight on the possibilities of the Jacksonville Jaguars as we head into the beginning of free agency. Until then, you guys take care of each other and make sure you join us tomorrow here on Locked On Jaguars.